So we're going to keep making progress on this red EVO and add a whole bunch of stuff to our Firewall and do a bunch more under the hood to get ready to drop in the engine and transmission. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of this red EVO build. So we got a lot to do under the hood to get things ready, and thankfully we get to get it out of the cold weather, bring it inside, and work in a nice heated garage. As I mentioned in my last video, I'm also changing out the sway bar bushings with OEM bushings, so we're going to do that. And then I got brand new bolts for the power steering rack to hold that down, so we're going to swap those out as well. And we got some fluid film to put some protective coating on and try to keep rust from coming back. So those sway bar bushings, I figured I would just change them out while I could. The good news is you do not have to actually fully drop the front subframe to get to these. The bad news is they're still a pain to get to, and if your engine's in your car, it's not going to be too easy to do. I was typically able to get to the front bolts of the bushings with a regular ratchet and socket, and then I used a wrench from behind, from the bottom side, to come in and get those back side bolts out with a wrench. But here you can see I slid off that old bushing. Here's the new one compared to the old. You can see it looks like the old one got a little squished and flattened out a little bit, so hopefully it's worth putting these new ones in. They were pretty cheap either way, so I figured I would just do it while I was in here. So we're going to take that old bushing off, wrap it around that sway bar, and actually having the plate on that holds it down is a little less important to have on before you slide it in place on this side. Right now I'm working on the passenger side. On the driver's side, it's even harder to get into this bushing, so on that side I made sure I had that plate on in place before I even slid it over. So here's a shot coming up from the bottom underside of the car where you can see the ones that are tougher to get at here. Like I said, both the backside ones are going to be a bit harder to get at because they're kind of below the firewall. But you can sneak in there with a wrench. Sometimes with the right socket you can get in there as well. But because of more steering components on the driver's side of the car, it is a bit trickier, a bit tighter to get in. But of course, we're going to go ahead and do that side as well. Trust me when I say I removed the bolts, and I couldn't even really show you very easily removing them. But, you know, I removed both of those bolts so I could get that out of place. Slid that one up over. It seemed to work well for both of these, just to slide them up and over. And then take the new one, slide it back on, and slide it down. And we'll just have this metal part on top before we slide it down because, again, it's tough. It's just tough to get in on this side. Didn't show tightening up the bolts, but trust me, I tightened them up. So now we got some fluid film. I'm going to spray this in areas right now where it's just easier to get to, again, when there's no engine out. I've never used the fluid film before. It is an interesting product because it does seem almost like it's just like oil. I don't know how to describe it, but it's not like you're painting on something that just paints on. You just spray it on, and then it's like it could just easily come off, wipe off. It's like a fluid. I'm just trying it out in different areas where the other one got rusted out, especially those lines, the lines that have the steering fluid in. So I definitely wanted to do it there. And then just playing around a little bit on that front subframe itself. It's interesting too that it looks like this has this kind of reaction where it just is doing what you see here. So it's just what it does. So I just sprayed it on and I left it in place, and hopefully that'll help prevent some rust. And in order to put those new bolts in place that hold down the power steering rack, I did have to remove this rear motor mount bracket once again. It's not too bad to get in there, especially since I just did this, of course, so I knew all the bolts would come out relatively fine. So I did that right away. Probably didn't really need to put these new bolts in, but I don't know. I just felt like, again, they were $10, which I guess isn't the cheapest thing in the world, but just figured for $10 I could put these brand new bolts in and hopefully not have any issues in the future. So, and as always, I put a little bit of anti-seize on them just because I didn't want them to be stuck in the future. And tighten them up, and it does look a lot better, I'd say, with those bolts. Not that anyone's really going to see it once the engine's in place, but I know it looks better. Now, putting that bracket back in place for that rear motor mount, I did spray the inside of it with some of that fluid film, and I know some people are like, why don't you just paint this? I mean, yeah, I could sand it down and paint it or whatever if I really wanted to, but honestly, as rusty as that silver car was, this piece was still solid on the silver car. It had some surface rust, but I'm just honestly not as worried about it. to rusting out and, you know, having a critical failure. But go ahead, call me a hypocrite, because I just changed those bolts out kind of for no reason. So I could make this look better too. It just would have been a bit more work to do so, but I think it's going to hold up just fine the way it is either way. So I didn't bother taking out. If I had access to easily sandblast it and like powder coat it, if I had a bunch of pieces I were going to powder coat, I'd probably add this to, you know, the pile and get a bunch of things powder coated and painted nicely. But in this case, I'm going to hope the fluid film and stuff keeps it from getting too rusty. So there we go. That's what everything looked like for kind of the final parts of messing around with this front subframe. I feel like I keep saying that, but hopefully I won't be touching much of anything else on this front subframe from now on. We should be in pretty good shape. Should be ready to go for a couple years, hopefully, with everything sprayed on there. Next, the firewall. It does look super clean and nice like this with nothing on it, but of course we need a functional firewall. So we got this mat that we can put on in place, some sound deadening and I think fireproofing stuff. I'm not exactly sure, but we're going to start putting this in place and putting everything else up as we go. Of course, there's certain things you got to run through, like the shifter cables, a throttle cable. There was a hose, I think, for a boost gauge, so we ran those through. And now you can see what it looks like once we put this on the firewall before we start adding all the other components here. And there are clips like this that hold it in place that just kind of, I think, are made to hold this piece onto the firewall. So I put a couple of those in place right away as well. And then starting on the driver's side, we got our clutch master and clutch slave cylinder here. So we're going to put our clutch master through the firewall and line it up and slide it in. It does have studs on it. This is a harder piece, of course, to get to if your brake master cylinder is in place. So it's good to do it in this order. And of course, once you put things inside the car, you know, there's studs. So you would do the nuts on the studs from inside the car. I did not show that because that was a pain in the butt and I didn't like doing it. So we're moved on to the brake booster here. There is a gasket. You can note that there's a gasket to put on to this that we're going to put in place as well before we push this into the firewall. Both of these items connect directly to your pedals, right? So this black one that I'm putting in right now, this black brake booster is connecting directly to the brake pedal. And then the slave, the clutch master, I should say, is connecting directly to your clutch pedal. And now this is our brake master that we're going to put in place as well. Luckily, all the nuts were just still in place, so I knew exactly what nuts I needed to bolt this on. And then again, from inside the car, I had to put those pins in place to connect these to the pedals and then bolt them in place as well. And now we're going to move on to this part of the engine harness where half of it kind of goes inside the car. The other half comes outside on the firewall here. Right here where I'm showing is kind of where it splits. So these wires we need to run inside the car. They run up to the ECU directly, I believe. And then these wires stay outside the car. You can see they got the fuel injectors on it. You can see they got part of some fuses on it, parts that run to our ABS. We're going to run through all this stuff and get it all set up. And the first step is to, of course, feed things through to the inside of the car. So we're going to run the wires through this way and push them through and pull them through and get them in place. And then the part where it mounts to the firewall, one side kind of has a stud, the other side uses a bolt. So I push the stud through and then tighten up a nut on the other side of that stud. And then on this side where I'm working now, I just had a bolt that I put in place to tighten it up. So you're going to notice a little editing magic going on here, especially with this ABS stuff, basically because I wanted to show you how to do all this wiring harness first, rather than break from the wiring harness to just do some of the brake ABS stuff. So as you can see, this ABS module is in place and I plugged in the wiring harness to that and ran up some other wires. And now we're running the wiring harness the other way. As you can see, it runs towards the driver's side of the car here. And there's a couple spots in the firewall that we can push it in place and run the harness on top of this frame rail here. And then there's a screw here on the side where it bolts in to the frame rail as well to hold it in place. And there we go. This is just a shot showing exactly how things are ran. I think I got it pretty close. This is it kind of can only really fit in one way that makes sense for all these things to line up. So that's kind of a good design here. So we're just going to tighten up those nuts real quick to hold this harness to the firewall. And next, as I said, ABS sensor or ABS module, whatever you want to call it. You're not supposed to hold this thing upside down. I think I might have did that. I don't know. I was looking in the user's manual later when it came to finding these lines and stuff, and it said that you're not supposed to, of course, shock this or even hold it upside down. So hopefully it works just fine once I get it in place and working. So we are going to mount it up to the side of our car here and tighten up the bolts holding it down. Just 2 on the bottom, 1 on the top. And of course, there are a couple clips that are going to hold our brake lines in place. I'm actually missing one of them. One more I should have put on. So this first one here, I also put upside down. So I'm going to spin it right side up in just a second. Here's where the second one goes here. And there would be a third one closer to those heater hoses as well. Now, what's interesting about these lines, they do have like paint on them with different color coding, which I'm trying to kind of totally sort out. But I was just kind of basing this off what I saw on the Silver EVO and the way these were bent and just kind of taking a guess at where they went. But since you're watching this video, you get to get all more details that I dug into later, which I've shown on the screen here, where you can see which lines connect to which part of the car. So the 2 lines I started with first are the 1 and the 6, which both go to the master cylinder. One is a primary, one's a secondary. So those were the 2 kind of on the front of this module, and then there's the 4 connections on top, and all those go to one kind of specific wheel of a vehicle. So in this case, 2 and 5, the ones that are kind of closest to the firewall, those both go to the front, and 3 and 4 go to the rear. And then I added my own little color code thing to the ones that kind of matched up to me as far as the colors on these lines that are closest to this ABS module. I also think I kind of did this in the wrong order. I started with the ones that go to our master cylinder, and I probably should have saved those for last. Not necessarily because of the way they connect to the ABS module, but because they kind of, one of them was in the way of the line that ran to the left front, and I kind of had to unscrew it and redo it. So if you're watching this to try to redo this or do it all yourself, I'd recommend first that you actually connect the lines that go to each wheel, and then save the ones that go to the master cylinder for last. So opposite of what I did. But again, the colors I talked about, this one here is the yellow one, and here's the pink one. And these pink and yellow lines both run down kind of between the subframe and the firewall because they run to the connections going to the rear of the car for the rear wheels. So I should have did a better job of having them down in that place before I put them in place like this. But of course, these are bendable. You just can't really, you don't want to kink them, of course. So I was still able to get them in place after I even connected them to this ABS module. Again, I mostly just referenced photos from my silver car, so I just looked at the way these lines were ran on my silver car and tried to run them the same way on this red car. The one that runs to the driver's side front wheel is a bit tricky too. Again, this is probably the first one I should have did, but you would want to run this. You're going to have to run it through this rubber grommet that goes out by the strut tower here to run it out to your front wheel. So I ran this through that way first, and then had to kind of finagle it around and bend it around a little bit to get it in place so I could run it up to this ABS module. And now you can see me kind of just sorting all these out, trying to find the right order in which they should line up and clip in. And if you want part number for these clips, I'm going to put that up on the screen as well in case you just need those. They're actually relatively cheap too. So I actually did order a new one that should be coming that I'm going to put in place for this one spot where I was missing them. They definitely do make it, all look like it should, make it look nice, all spaced out all evenly and stuff. So it's probably worth having those in place for multiple reasons. Keep things lined up like it should be, and then make it look nice as well. And just in case you need part numbers, you could make these brake lines yourself, of course. I think some of these might be discontinued right now, but EVO parts are sometimes discontinued, sometimes they're not. So I'm not going to tell you that they're all discontinued, but I'm just going to give you part numbers for some of these brake lines and also just the generic part number for these clips if you want to buy some of these clips as well. Speaking of clips, here's the one that holds these 2 lower brake lines in place. I say lower, but I should say rear, I guess. This is where the rear lines run down. Again, between the firewall and the subframe, their brake lines are run to the back of the vehicle where we're going to connect those eventually. And here's what it looks like. I am missing one of the lines. I actually ordered a brand new one to run to the right front of the car, but here's where the rest of the lines look. Just a generic idea for you to see how everything looks when it's ran. Next, we got this bracket with a couple pieces that plug in on it. This kind of shiny silver piece here is what you would be using if you're using stock low Z type injectors. We're using high Z injectors, so I have this modded plug-in where basically the mod is only that you take all the wires and snip off that other silver piece and twist them all together. But this is from the silver car, and we're going to run these high Z injectors, of course, on the red car. So we're going to snap that in place. And then mount this bracket to our firewall. Pretty easy to mount up. You can see where it should line up. There's a stud on the bottom that can hold it in place, and then you should be able to get your top bolts mounted as well. Key thing here, of course, is this bracket kind of blocks those brake lines, so you want to make sure you have your brake lines sorted out before you put this bracket back in place. But then you want to go ahead, tighten up that nut, and tighten up those 2 bolts, and you should be good to go. Once that bracket is in place, we can continue to plug in stuff from the harness we ran. So there's 3 plugins that we're going to snap in place here. And now I think the previous owner of this car was planning to actually repaint everything underneath the hood here in the engine bay, but everything looked pretty good to me. So I'm unwrapping all the rest of this wiring harness that he had wrapped up, and I'm going to get this main fuse panel in place. It was a bit tricky initially because I didn't realize that the main wiring harness that ran out to it was underneath a protruding part of the fender when it needed to go above it. But as soon as I moved it above, I was able to get this fuse block up in place and bolt it in place. And here you can see the 2 main bolts holding that in place. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to follow this harness down. You can see here, this is where it needs to be ran up above. If it's ran below, it was not having enough length to get in place. And then this other portion of the wiring harness, we're going to put that in place as well. And there we have it. I did a couple other small things as well. You can see the front bumper support itself is back on. The engine bay looks like a mess now. Honestly, there's a lot of stuff going on, but that's good. That means we got things in place where hopefully in the next episode of this build, we're going to be dropping that engine and transmission back in place. So there you have it, everybody. That's about it for this episode of this Red EVO build series. As always, if you think I did anything wrong or could have did something better, leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know your thoughts. I hope you guys are enjoying this series, especially my hardcore people that watch this. These EVO videos always seem to do really good initially and then just kind of really fall off as far as viewership goes compared to some of my other videos that I do. But again, just want to say I really appreciate you for watching. And if you want to help me out at all, if you haven't already liked and subscribed, you know, all that stuff people need to beg for to be a YouTuber nowadays. But if you could do that, it could be certainly helpful to me. But as always, this is Paul from Boosted Films saying thanks so much for watching. I just want to say that domestic violence is never okay. If you or someone you know is experiencing issues with a partner and doesn't feel safe, please visit the website thehotline.org or call 1-800-799-SAFE.